Same people, this is what they do every day. My way to the wall right there, turn right and then turn left into the main eastern gate. These vendors of shirts, etc., don't have to get started as early as the people who are the food vendors. So there would have been some kind of a structure there. No idea what it was. This should be our typical entry gate. Yeah, see, there's the slot in that arch that the door rises up into. Same thing here. Nothing will be novel. Most of the archwork that we've seen elsewhere in the secondary arch is all gone now. Certainly the western arch is the most complete, and probably archaeologists then can reconstruct, if they needed to do it with CG, what any of these entrances looked like complete by taking the still existing chunks and putting them all together. It's Monday, so perhaps the tower will stay quiet from that horrible sound it makes before it makes its bells sound. That wall over there that's been reconstructed, my guess is that it went all the way around the church and that these two pillars here would be in the same position. And so a similar colonnaded wall would come down here. So I'm pretty much back where I was when I finished yesterday before I jumped on the ferry to Hvar. And so we'll just continue the search for anything interesting from here. There you can see considerable reconstruction. Whether that internal surface of archway is original or not, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Most of what we see here obviously is a stabilization, a reconstruction of that floor, if you will. Probably trying to restore remnants of what existed, except you can see there was an arch, then it's only partially continued to be used. And here at the top of the wall, what I imagine is an original plaque or insignia of something, but weather has so worn it down that there's not much left to look at. Here, interestingly, we are back on the rear right side if you were standing in front of the tower looking at the church. And so here we can see, interestingly enough, what most tourists don't probably get to see, just because they don't take the time, is the original columns and whatever you call the structure that goes across the columns. But these are the original ones. We saw pieces of the original ones lying down, but this is in situ, presumably because it was a debacc. It was unmolested by the forces that, usually human, that attack this kind of thing. All around me is a informal lapidarium, if you will, of structures that came from wherever, elements that came from wherever. We'll take a closer look at that one there. But here behind this foliaged wall are distinct and probably pretty good examples of the pieces. This looks like the base and a partial column from the church. Their face, like the two I was looking for yesterday, which probably, before it got so heavily weathered, was almost identifiable, at least by those who would be in the know. And this looks like it's perhaps the capital of a column. I think it is. Notice the leaves pointing down, which would be pointing up if it were orientated correctly. And there another piece of that top portion that runs along the columns. Now if we look at this piece, we can identify it up above. Don't know that we can identify this corner, double corner piece. But the first of those two that we looked at is in the middle up here, I believe. And what's always interesting to realize is that, and to think about, is the person and the time it took and what the circumstances were in that person's life who carved each of these things. Did one man or one couple of men carve the same piece So they became experts in that. This looks like it's a capitol. You'll see these angular portions at the top, but a piece that was abutting another wall. So that portion to the left there was actually embedded in the wall, and this part protruded out and sat on a column, giving the column stability. There you can see those same angles at the top. We can get a close-up view of the existing remains. Now up there being carved, particularly the way they are and how we're looking at them, they almost look like they're light. I mean in weight, literally. Here another view of that adjacent building that we saw a day or so ago, with that curve implying another building was built next to it at one point in time. But they apparently just ignored that and put in the doorway and this faux column that we see here. And notice here, it looks like for the purpose of quick restoration, this cornerstone and several others along this route have just simply been replaced without any kind of reproduction of the detail, which we can see alluded to in these pieces next to it. Again, the erosion in these stones, like Swiss cheese, implies how weak this stone is when subjected to weather and water principally. I wonder what these little knobs sticking out here were for. Was it possible that they allowed stones that came out horizontally as a pavement, if you will, to lock in place, unlike the pavement that's been installed later next to it? Imagine 2,000 years ago if you had access to this area, how this view would look, with everything pristine. And looking at this, we have to imagine that there was a connecting post that went from the top of this column over to that other column that we see there, making a complete circle about the church. And that red color up there on the top, does that suggest that all of this building was painted in different colors? Particularly that artwork, if you will, in the carved stone. This is a pretty little garden lapidarium. Not hard to imagine that in the past and still today, probably many of these interior gardens that we don't have access to would have little chunks of this as decoration. Notice here another face. Its detail a little bit stronger, suggesting that it had some kind of protection within the structure. What a novel place to live. I just wanted to shoot these flowers that overhang that little lapidarium garden, and managed to reach all the way over to those folks' home and arching all the way up to the top. Now there's another plant there that starts and goes up there too. But what a beautiful facade. We're looking at another lapidarium, but certainly not one that's for high display because it's ordinary stuff, although to the archaeologist it would be perhaps meaningful and be used someday with computer capability to fill in. As I pan across this facade of the wall facing the sea, even though subsequent buildings were built in front or behind those windows, can we imagine logically that Diocletian would have looked out through one of these windows or more? It's an interesting door treatment on the side of Diocletian's residential compound. Here's some detail on the top of the entrance doorway to one of the entrances of his compound. And we'll get a closer look at this detail right now. This also may be an old remnant of access to the top of the wall. A stairway perhaps coming down right there.